The County Safety and Justice Affairs Committee. Roll call, please.
Calling roll, Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
Ms. Baker.
Here.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Hairston.
Here.
Ms. Conwell.
Here.
There is a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that Councilman Miller is in attendance.
And welcome, Mr. Miller. Thank you. Public comment related to the agenda.
No, Mr. Chair, no one is signed in.
In your packet, you have the minutes of June 20th. If they're in order, I'll accept the motion. All in favor? Aye. Against? Thank you. Resolution 2017-0122.
Resolution number 2017-0122, authorizing an amendment to a revenue-generating agreement with City of Cleveland for crime lab testing services for the period 11/1/2014 through 12/31/2025 to change the scope of services effective 1/1/2017 and for additional revenue in the amount of $900,000.
Thank you. Who is here? Dr. Gilson? Welcome. I hear Mr. Shannon's father passed away, and we are sad
Yes, he
to
did.
hear that, and that was just recently, so he was unable to attend.
Sunday, yeah.
And I know you're stepping into a little bit of a tough situation here, so if you could struggle through this, we'd appreciate it.
Sure. No, this is very familiar to me. As you know, about a year and a half ago, we absorbed a lot of the crime laboratory operations from the city of Cleveland, in addition to what we had already brought under our roof. And there was an existing agreement for 10 years to cover crime laboratory services, including DNA, drug chemistry, toxicology as needed. And since then, we opened a fingerprint laboratory, which required an amendment to our contract then, and now this is the amendment to include oversight of the firearms laboratory. We absorbed the laboratory actually already earlier this year, so it's housed in our building. We've taken on employee from Cleveland to our operation. Right now, we are in the process of accepting firearms work from City of Cleveland only till we stabilize that. That'll be the biggest provider, the biggest source of work to the laboratory. We had originally anticipated going online with the suburban communities over the summer. That got pushed back to the fall because we weren't aware as extensive the backlog was in Cleveland, and we'd like to get that under control before we start to take on additional municipalities. The agreement is a 10-year agreement, so it would mirror what's already in place. We also are transitioning this laboratory from a not accredited laboratory to an accredited one. As you may remember, one of the things that we undertook when we opened the crime laboratory was to get our accreditation by the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors, or ASCLD. All of our sections are accredited under them, with the most recent being fingerprint from our spring inspection. The way inspections work with the crime laboratory, every other year involves some physical presence. What we had in the spring was a full on-site inspection. Next year will be a paper inspection, and then 2019 will be a kind of modified on-site inspection. That's when we want to have the crime laboratory accrediting body inspect the firearms laboratory. I don't anticipate any trouble with that. It's just better to do those things when somebody's actually physically in the building as opposed to doing it on paper. The accrediting body usually doesn't go for that. Okay. The only thing I would say is that, making that transition, we kind of just have to monitor a couple of things in terms of whether we have adequate personnel. Part of it is that going from a laboratory that doesn't use accredited practices to a laboratory that does implies some extra steps that weren't being done in Cleveland Crime Laboratory or in the firearms laboratory when it was under City of Cleveland. The other thing is to gauge the impact when we do bring the suburban communities on board as to whether or not, we're falling behind on staffing. So I can't foresee whether that'll impact us in terms of needing another person to provide service or not, but just wanted to make you aware of that.
Okay. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Through the chair to Dr. Gilson, you mentioned a 10-year agreement. Is that with City of Cleveland or just a 10-year overall? Who is that 10-year agreement with?
This is going to be with the city of Cleveland, and that was to mirror the original language in the contract for them to provide support to the county crime laboratory as a sort of quote-unquote super user.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Sir.
Mr. Chair, Dr. Gibson, how are you?
Yes, I'm doing well. How about you, sir?
Good. Well, I just wanted to say, you all have done a fantastic job. Not only, when we have a body we have to view or do some kind of autopsy on, besides that, with the crime lab and the other services you all provide there. I tell you, I hear folks when I'm at different meetings, they said, listen, that Dr. Gilson and his staff are phenomenal.
I'll share it with the staff. I get to take the credit, but the staff do the heavy lifting.
Folks are talking about you guys and all the great work you do, and especially with some of the most recent issues we had in Cleveland with some murders and other things, and how you all have been able to quickly help identify through DNA testing and some other things and getting folks off the streets. Folks are really supportive of the work that you all are doing there. They said, it's not just the coroner's office. You go and view someone, identify about it. They actually do more than just that. For the Cleveland deal, I know this is an amendment. Is it just for the dollar amount, or is it for the time period as well?
This was actually work we anticipated bringing on board since we opened the crime lab. It was just a matter of transitioning the laboratory over to the county. So what we originally wanted to do was hire a county employee as a supervisor for the firearms laboratory, and then we were going to absorb Cleveland's laboratory. And in hiring the person to supervise, we wanted to get somebody who had familiarity with accreditation so that they could steer that process in addition to being a working supervisor. That took a lot longer than we thought relative to other laboratories, and there's a pretty substantial shortage in terms of firearms examiners in the country. So finding somebody who was, one, competent to competent and qualified, and two, willing to move to Cleveland, because once folks get into this position, they tend to stay put. That took a little longer than I had hoped to. So now that the person's in place and we can transition Cleveland's personnel over, get them certified, and then get the laboratory accredited, that's all this is coming to. We're not adding anything beyond that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the kind comments. I will share them with the staff.
Absolutely.
Anything further? And I would assume you'd want to move this under second reading, or
Yes, please.
looking at the timelines. So if everybody's in agreement, I'll accept a motion for Resolution 2017-0122 under second reading suspension to the full council at the next meeting, not tonight, the next meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Just
Thanks.
if you wait 1 sec,
Sure.
Doctor. As a quick update on the jail, we had anticipated that contract would be before us. It's not. They're still working on it. So let's hope those folks down at City Hall can put their act together and figure this thing out. We are hopeful that they can do that. I know on our side that we're working diligently to get that done. Doctor, the only reason I had you hold up is last time we saw you, you had spoken in D.C. on the opioid crisis. I just didn't know if you had an update from that point forward to today.
Sure, it's always a fluid thing. Actually, I was invited to speak down in D.C. because the topic was around the influx of drugs through the United States Postal Service. And I think the goal of the hearing was to support legislation to kind of ask them to ramp up their capacity to screen products that were coming into this country. Mm-hmm. This goes back actually as far back as September 11th, 2001. And at that time, the private carriers, FedEx and UPS and others, did comply with, the move by the federal government to have better tracking of what was entering the country. Postal Service didn't exactly follow through as well as the private carriers. So I think this was the Senate's attempt to nudge them into better compliance. My part there was to kind of talk about our experience with opiates, and I'm sure nobody in this room is at all unfamiliar with the fact that we've had a pretty dramatic rise, especially in the last year, where we went from 370 total opiate deaths to 666 in 1 year, from 2015 to 2016. This year, as far as we can project out, and now we're halfway through, we will probably see about another 120 to 125 deaths, so somewhere in the mid 800s region. I will add, since then we've been inspected by another accrediting body, the medical examiners body, which is the National Association of Medical Examiners. We were specifically cited for our toxicology turnaround time and our personnel caseloads per physician. So those are things I'm working on right now. I don't know where things sort themselves out. My own impression is we're not at the top of the problem yet, but I don't know if you recall when we had the initial dramatic rise in heroin deaths in 2013, we started to plateau after a period of time. And then the last year that we really had a big heroin presence without fentanyl was 2015, and our numbers actually went down, the number of heroin deaths. It was still dramatically up where it had been 10 years before. And I don't want to speak prematurely. It may be encouraging that whatever trend we saw in 2016 with fentanyl deaths may be actually starting to slow down in 2017, but still rising. Just have to kind of follow those things out. I did have the opportunity to talk to my drug chemistry. Those are the people who would test seized drugs in the laboratory in our building. And we're seeing fewer fentanyl analogs. Those are the things like carfentanil, 3-methylfentanyl, those big animal sedatives, which to me is kind of one of those things I'm keeping an eye on, because if they become the new normal, instead, like we had fentanyl replace heroin, if carfentanil and those things replace fentanyl, I don't know if that drives mortality further upward. At some point, not to be callous, but at some point, lethal is lethal. And you get to a diminishing return, I suspect, where even though carfentanil is 100 times more potent than fentanyl, does that really make a big difference in terms of the mortality that we see? Don't know for sure. Certainly we saw a dramatic worsening with heroin relative to a transition to fentanyl, and that's probably a comparable degree of potency, about 50 to 100 times more potent fentanyl relative to heroin. So those are trends I'm watching. I'd be happy to answer more questions. I think about this a lot.
Any questions? Well, thank you for being here, and, oh, yes, ma'am.
In regards to what is the saving grace, the naplazone, or what is it called?
Naloxone.
Naloxone. I heard something on the news that I guess it's taking more than one for some. If somebody has been saved by it before, it's taking maybe a double shot or 3 shots to save.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to that?
Absolutely, yes. It's just a reflection of the higher potency of fentanyl. And what's happened since the introduction of the DAWN program, the naloxone program, is originally you would get 2 atomizers with 2 milligrams of Narcan. Now they give you 4. And it's intended with the idea that you need more to reverse fentanyl. And heroin, especially heroin deaths by themselves, are down dramatically. In our county, there were actually less than 100 in 2016. And the reason for that is my feeling is, once we tease out the big contribution to heroin mortality that comes from mixtures with fentanyl, heroin itself has responded really, really well to the degree of naloxone distribution that we've put out in the community. And I say that frequently if I speak. It was one of our best investments as a county, and it made an impact. It's just the game changed, unfortunately, in 2016.
But the cost is according to the news that I had saw, and it wasn't on our county, it was on another city that was a smaller city that was having, it saved deaths on one side, but by the repeated number of use of the naloxone that they've had to use on individuals, it's risen the cost a little bit. So is it only one pharmaceutical company that it comes from? Is there?
No, actually, there was a sort of classic company that made it, and it isn't a very terribly expensive drug. I think their name is not.
Okay.
I think one of the things that I think their name is Amphostar or something. One of the things they tried to do was to triple the price, and our Attorney General, among others, was able to say, no, you can't do that. I think don't take advantage of the crisis. I saw that it's down, I think, close to Dayton, where they were like, we're not going to respond anymore. I think that's irresponsible, and I think that it really, doesn't look at addiction the way we should. We don't tell somebody who has, emphysema because they smoked all their life, well, if you get into respiratory trouble 3 times, I'm not coming out to help you. Or if we have a brittle diabetic and their sugar goes out of whack 3 times, I think my honest feeling is when people say things like that, they really didn't intend to help in any way from the get-go, and now they're just trying to do some kind of phony compassion, like, well, I tried, but, either treat it as a disease or don't, but don't pretend that it's not.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Well, Doctor.
There's an editorial comment.
Thanks for being here. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks very much. If you'd like, I can send Janine info on calling hours for Hustad to.
That would be great. If you could get it to our
share
office,
that.
that'd be great.
Absolutely, sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I see Mrs. Carney. Anything? Nothing? That's always a good sign. Miscellaneous business? Other public comment?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to note that the legislation that you just heard is on tonight's council meeting agenda
I was
for
unaware
vote.
of that. I apologize. It will be heard this evening. We're walking that on, I guess?
No, it's listed under pending committee recommendation.
Okay. Thank you. I apologize. Anything further? Thank you. Okay.